They say the world is full of kind people, but sometimes it takes one person's pain for the rest of us to remember. On a cold Tuesday night in downtown Chicago, inside a small diner that smelled of burnt coffee and broken dreams, a young waitress cried quietly at the corner booth. Nobody looked up. Nobody asked why. Because in a world that moves too fast, a crying woman had become background noise. Haley Turner had worked at Mel's Route 41 diner for almost 3 years. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't even particularly clean, but it paid just enough to cover rent for her one-bedroom apartment on Ashland Avenue and help her younger brother, Ben, with his community college tuition. Her shift started at 3 p.m. and ended around midnight. By 7, her feet would ache. By 10, her voice would strain from saying anything else for you tonight, too many times. And by 11, when the diner grew quiet except for the hum of neon lights outside and the clinking of dishes in the back, she'd start to feel it, that heavy silence that reminded her how alone she really was. The world outside didn't stop, but for Haley, every night felt like a pause between surviving and falling apart. That evening, the rain came early, heavy, relentless, pounding against the diner's glass windows. Chicago had a way of making even the strongest people feel small when the weather turned like that. She was refilling the sugar jars when her phone buzzed. A text from her brother. "They cut my work hours again. I don't know how I'll cover books this semester." Her chest tightened. She typed back quickly. "Don't worry, Benny. I'll figure something out." But she didn't know how she would. Rent was due in 4 days, her tips had been awful all week, and her manager had just hinted they might be cutting staff. She tucked her phone away, forcing a smile when a customer waved for a refill. "Another cup, hon?" she asked, pouring steaming coffee into his mug. He nodded without looking up, eyes glued to his phone. That's how most nights went. She served coffee to people who never saw her. Around 10:30, a group of businessmen came in, loud, confident, wearing suits that didn't belong anywhere near a place like Mel's. They laughed too hard, spoke too fast, and treated the diner like a joke. One of them snapped his fingers. "Miss? Can we get some service here?" Haley hurried over, tray in hand. "Good evening, what can I get you?" He smirked. "Start with a smile." The others chuckled. Haley forced one. "Of course, sir." "Coffee," he said. "Make it quick. We've got real places to be." She nodded, biting her lip. The comment stung, but she'd learned to swallow pride when tips depended on politeness. As she walked away, she heard one of them mutter, "Bet she's been here forever. Probably dropped out of high school." She didn't correct him, didn't say she graduated top of her class or that she once dreamed of being a nurse. Dreams didn't pay bills. By 11:15, the diner was almost empty. Only the businessmen remained, now arguing over something meaningless, and an elderly man asleep at the counter. Haley stood near the window, wiping down a table for the 3rd time, trying not to think about the text from Ben or the eviction notice she'd tucked behind the register. Then it happened. A plate slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. The crash echoed through the quiet diner. Everyone looked up, for half a second. She froze, heart pounding, shards of porcelain scattered at her feet. Then the laughter started. One of the businessmen shook his head. "Nice one, sweetheart. Maybe stick to wiping tables." The others chuckled again and went back to their conversation. Haley bent down to clean the mess, but her vision blurred. Tears filled her eyes faster than she could blink them away. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to breathe, trying not to let the sob escape. But it came anyway, quiet, broken, and full of every hurt she'd held inside for months. And just like that, she cried. Right there, on the greasy floor of a diner that nobody cared about. No one moved. No one helped. The laughter continued. The rain outside kept falling. The world went on, except for her. Then, through the blur of tears, she noticed someone standing near the door. He hadn't been there before. A man in his mid-30s, tall, dark coat, the kind of presence that felt quiet but commanding. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't pretending not to notice. He was watching her, with the kind of eyes that didn't judge, just saw. He stepped forward slowly. "You okay?" he asked, voice deep but calm. Haley quickly wiped her cheeks and forced a shaky smile. "I'm fine. Just a long day." He glanced at the broken plate, then at the businessmen in the corner, who were still laughing. "Doesn't look fine," he said softly. She hesitated. "It's part of the job." He shook his head slightly. "No. That's not part of any job." There was something about his tone, firm but gentle, like he'd seen this scene before and hated it every time. "What's your name?" he asked. "Haley," she said quietly. "Haley," he repeated, as if committing it to memory. "I'm Mark." He reached into his coat pocket and placed $100 bill on the counter. "For the coffee." She blinked, confused. "That's way too much." He shrugged. "Then consider it for the plate." She managed a small laugh through her tears. "You really don't have to." "I know," he interrupted softly. "But I want to." The businessman at the corner scoffed. "Guess the waitress found her knight in shining armor." Mark turned to them, eyes sharp. "Guess some people never learned respect." The diner went quiet. The laughter died instantly. Mark turned back to Haley, his voice calm again. "You should take a break. Go sit down." "I can't," she said. "My shift." "Tell your manager I said it's fine." Haley almost smiled. "And who exactly are you to tell him that?" Mark's lips curved slightly. "A customer who's seen enough." When her manager came out from the back, Mark quietly spoke with him. Within seconds, the older man nodded and disappeared again. Haley sat down in the booth by the window, still stunned. Mark joined her, setting down 2 coffees. "You didn't have to step in," she said. "I know," he replied. "But sometimes the world needs reminding that people like you matter." She stared at him, unsure how to respond. "You don't even know me." He smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But I know what it looks like when someone's about to break." The rain tapped gently against the glass, the lights from passing cars reflecting in his eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said quietly, "Everyone ignored you tonight, Haley." "I won't." And something about the way he said it, calm, certain, without pity, made her believe him, even just for a moment. She looked down at the coffee, hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. "You're welcome." The businessmen left soon after, still muttering under their breath. But Haley didn't care anymore. For once, someone had noticed. Mark stayed until closing, helping her lock up, then left a second tip by the register, another $100 bill, folded neatly with a note attached. When she unfolded it later that night, her heart skipped. "You don't deserve to cry alone." Mer. As she walked home through the rain, clutching her coat around her, she looked up at the glowing streetlights and whispered to herself. Maybe, not everyone ignores the crying waitress. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that this man, this stranger with kind eyes, wasn't just passing through. He had his own ghosts. And saving her might be his only chance to save himself. Some people walk into your life quietly, like a whisper, and yet somehow, they change the sound of everything. For Haley Turner, that stranger in the dark coat wasn't just a man with money, he was a question the universe had suddenly asked her. Who was he? And why did it feel like he cared? The next morning, the diner looked different. Not physically, the cracked tiles were still there, the smell of coffee was still strong, and the flickering neon sign outside still buzzed like a tired heartbeat. But something inside her had changed. Haley woke up earlier than usual, replaying the night before in her mind. The $100 bill was still sitting on her kitchen counter, along with the note, "You don't deserve to cry alone." She couldn't stop staring at it. She had no reason to trust strangers, not after everything life had thrown her way, but something about that man, Mark, didn't feel like charity. It felt like concern. Real concern. Still, she reminded herself, people don't just step into your life out of nowhere to fix things. Not in Chicago. Not for waitresses making $3.75 an hour plus tips. So she tucked the note into her jacket pocket and told herself it didn't mean anything. When she arrived at Mel's diner that afternoon, Sandy, her coworker, leaned against the counter with a grin. "Well, look who's famous," Sandy teased, sipping a soda. Haley frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Mark Reynolds," Sandy said with exaggerated flair, waving a phone. "That guy who helped you last night? Turns out he's kinda a big deal." Haley blinked. "Wait, what?" Sandy spun the phone toward her. On the screen was an article from the Chicago Tribune. Tech philanthropist Mark Reynolds donates $2 million to Women's Shelter Initiative. Haley stared. The same dark coat. The same calm eyes. The man who sat in her booth last night was one of Chicago's youngest self-made millionaires, a software entrepreneur turned philanthropist who was known for showing up unannounced at small businesses, talking to ordinary people, and funding community causes quietly. Her jaw dropped. "You're kidding." "Nope." "And apparently, he likes diners." "My guess?" "He's scouting for another charity project." Haley shook her head, still processing. "He didn't mention any of that." Sandy smirked. "Maybe he didn't want to scare you off with his money." Haley rolled her eyes but couldn't hide the small smile tugging at her lips. That evening, as she worked her shift, she found herself glancing at the door more often than usual. Each time it opened, her heart jumped, and each time, it wasn't him. By 9:30, she gave up. "Of course he's not coming back," she muttered under her breath. "People like him don't eat here twice." But just as she turned to refill the coffee pot, she heard the door chime again. And there he was. Same coat. Same calm presence. Only this time, there was a faint smile on his face as if he knew she'd been hoping, or maybe expecting, him to return. "Evening," he said softly. Haley froze for a moment, then quickly composed herself. "Back for another expensive cup of coffee?" He chuckled. "You make it sound like a bad investment." "Depends," she said, raising an eyebrow. "You planning to tip another 100? He grinned. "We'll see how the service goes tonight." For the first time in a long time, Haley laughed. Not the polite kind, but a genuine one, the kind that makes people nearby look up just to see who brought light into the room. As the hours passed, the diner grew quiet again. Mark stayed in his usual booth, sipping coffee and watching the rain outside. Occasionally, he'd ask about her day, but he never pried too much. It wasn't until near closing that he said something that caught her off guard. "You said your brother's in college, right?" Haley blinked. How did you? You mentioned it last night, he said gently. Community college, I think. She nodded slowly. Yeah. Been studying graphic design. Or trying to, at least. His hours got cut at work, and I'm barely keeping up. Mark listened, really listened. Not the way people do just to respond, but like he was studying every word, every pause. After a while, he asked, Do you ever think about doing something else? Besides this, I mean? She looked down. All the time. Then why not? Haley sighed. Because dreams don't pay rent. He nodded quietly, as if the words hit too close to home. When her shift finally ended, Mark was still there. He waited until she hung up her apron, then walked her to the door. You shouldn't be walking home this late, he said. It's only a few blocks, she replied. Chicago's still Chicago, he said with a faint smile. She hesitated, then relented. All right, Mr. Reynolds. You can walk me halfway. He smirked. Deal. And please, it's just Mark. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick with reflections from streetlights and passing cars. As they walked, the city felt quieter, softer somehow. Haley stole a few glances at him, curiosity eating at her. So, why'd you really come back? She asked. He smiled. Would you believe me if I said I liked the coffee? She narrowed her eyes. Nope. He chuckled. Fair. Maybe I came back because I wanted to see if the crying waitress was doing better. She exhaled through a small laugh. You really know how to make that sound dramatic. He shrugged. Truth usually is. There was a pause, comfortable, but filled with something unspoken. Then he said, For what it's worth, Haley, people notice more than you think. They just don't always have the courage to show it. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, she saw something else behind his calm eyes. Something tired. Something sad. Is that true for you too? She asked softly. He hesitated, then smiled faintly. Maybe. When they reached her building, she turned to face him. Thank you, she said. For everything. He nodded. You don't have to thank me. I do, she said firmly. Because people like you don't usually stop for people like me. Mark looked down at the ground for a moment before meeting her eyes again. Maybe that's because people like you remind people like me what actually matters. For a second, neither spoke. Then he said, Good night, Haley. She smiled softly. Good night, Mark. He walked away, his silhouette fading into the misty streetlight glow, and something in her heart told her this wasn't the last time she'd see him. But that night, long after she climbed into bed, she couldn't sleep. Her mind kept circling back to him, not just his kindness, but the sadness behind his eyes. She grabbed her phone and typed his name, Mark Reynolds. Hundreds of results appeared, articles, interviews, charity features. But one caught her eye. Tech CEO Mark Reynolds steps down after wife's mysterious death. Haley froze. Her heart began to race. The article was dated 2 years ago. Apparently, Mark's wife, Elena Reynolds, had died in a car accident late one night on the same highway Mark had built his startup's headquarters near. Rumors suggested he was driving. He was never charged, but public opinion turned fast. After that, he vanished from the tech world and quietly began funding community charities across Chicago. Haley's chest tightened as she scrolled. So that was the sadness she'd seen, the ghost in his eyes. She whispered to herself. What are you running from, Mark Reynolds? The next morning at work, she couldn't shake it off. Every sound, every clink of a coffee cup, felt like an echo of that secret. And when Mark walked into the diner again later that evening, same seat, same calm face, she saw it differently this time. Not as the rich stranger who saved her, but as a man carrying something too heavy for even money to fix. Everyone ignored the crying waitress. But maybe, just maybe, she was about to discover that she wasn't the only one crying inside. The next few days at Mel's diner felt different. The morning rush came and went, truckers, nurses, tired night shift guards, but to Haley, everything blurred into routine. Except for one thing. Mark Reynolds had started showing up every evening, always the same booth, always quiet, always kind. At first, it made her nervous. She wasn't used to being seen, let alone remembered. But over time, his presence became something else, steadying. Like a warm hum underneath all the chaos of her life. Still, something about him didn't add up. He never talked about himself. Not really. He'd deflect questions with charm, or shift focus back to her life, her brother, her dreams. He knew things, small things, that made her wonder how much he had already looked into her. And the way he sometimes stared out the window, as if watching ghosts walk by. That Thursday night, the diner was almost empty. The hum of the refrigerator was louder than the chatter of customers. Haley was cleaning the counter when Mark walked in, drenched from the rain. His hair was wet, his coat darkened with streaks of water, but his expression, that same calm mask, stayed in place. "Rough night?" she asked, offering him a towel. He smiled faintly. "You could say that." "Coffee?" He nodded. "Please." "Strong is your sarcasm." She laughed. "That might be too strong for you, Mr. Reynolds." He chuckled, but his eyes flickered for a moment, as if the name Reynolds stung. She caught it, a flash of emotion quickly buried. When she brought his cup over, she noticed something strange. He had a small leather notebook beside him. Its cover was worn, edges curled, clearly old, but cared for. He opened it slightly, just enough for her to catch a glimpse of handwriting, and a photograph tucked inside. Haley saw it only for a second, but her heart skipped. The photo showed a young woman smiling in front of a brick building. And behind her, the unmistakable sign of the old Oak Ridge manufacturing plant. Haley froze. That was where her mother used to work. She blinked and tried to play it cool. "That notebook looks important." Mark closed it gently. "Just notes." "From work?" He shook his head. "From life." There was a pause, that heavy silence where both people know something's being hidden but neither wants to break it yet. "Haley," he said quietly, "do you ever feel like the universe puts certain people in your path for a reason?" She smiled softly. "All the time. Usually right before it tries to mess with me." That made him laugh, but his gaze didn't waver. "Maybe it's not trying to mess with you. Maybe it's trying to fix something." She looked at him curiously. "What are you trying to fix, Mark?" He didn't answer. Just stared into his coffee as if it held the past. Later that night, after closing, Haley couldn't shake what she saw. The photo. The Oak Ridge sign. Her mother's voice echoing from years ago, "Mr. Reynolds is the man who saved this plant, Haley. Remember that name." But back then, Mark Reynolds was just a business name to her, not a real person. Now he was sitting in her diner, watching her life unfold. Coincidence? Maybe. But her gut told her otherwise. She pulled out her phone and began searching, again. Mark Reynolds, Oak Ridge Manufacturing, enter. A few old articles popped up. Reynolds acquires Oak Ridge plant in 2008, saves hundreds of jobs. Reynolds' firm donates to Employees Welfare Fund. Her heart thudded. Her mother, Linda Turner, had worked there for over a decade. Then another headline made her blood run cold. Oak Ridge closes after fire claims 2 workers, investigation ongoing. She opened it. The date, 2015. Her mother had been one of the 2 workers who never made it out. Haley's throat tightened. She remembered that night, the sirens, the phone call, the smell of smoke clinging to her dreams for months. And now, sitting in front of her, was the man who once owned the plant. The next evening, Mark arrived again. Haley served him as usual, smiling through her racing thoughts. But this time, she couldn't stay quiet. "Mark," she said, sliding his cup over. "Can I ask you something?" He looked up. "Of course. You ever owned a factory called Oak Ridge?" He froze. Just for a second, but enough for her to notice. Then he leaned back slowly. "That's a name I haven't heard in years." "So you did?" "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." "What happened there?" Mark looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment, the calm mask he always wore cracked just enough to reveal something raw underneath. "There was a fire," he said. "Faulty wiring. 2 people died. The investigation cleared us, but I never stopped feeling like I should have done more." Haley's voice trembled. "One of them was my mother." The words hit like thunder. Mark went completely still. "Your mother?" he whispered. "Linda Turner. She worked there. You probably don't remember her. She was just one of the many employees you saved." Her tone was sharper than she meant, but years of pain poured out in one breath. Mark's eyes widened with recognition and guilt. "I remember her," he said softly. "She used to bring cookies to the night shift. Said they made everyone work happier." Haley's breath caught. "She did. Every Friday." Silence filled the air between them, the kind of silence that feels like it could collapse under its own weight. Mark spoke first. "Haley, I didn't know." She bit her lip. "Would it have made a difference?" His voice broke slightly. "Yes. It would have." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "When Oak Ridge burned down, I was out of the country closing a contract. By the time I got back, it was too late. I never forgave myself." For a long moment, Haley just stared at him, searching for lies, but finding only regret. And yet, it hurt. It hurt to see the man who represented the very system that took her mother away. When he finally left that night, she didn't say goodbye. She just watched him walk out, the rain swallowing his shadow again. As she wiped the counter, her hand brushed something under his empty coffee cup. A folded napkin. She unfolded it. Inside, written in neat handwriting, were the words, "Your mother once helped me when I was at my lowest. Maybe it's time I return the favor." Underneath it, another photograph. Her mother standing beside a younger Mark Reynolds, smiling, laughing, arms around each other like old friends. Haley's knees almost gave out. That night, she sat on her apartment floor, the photo trembling in her hands. "How did we end up here, Mom?" she whispered. "The man who owned your factory, the man who changed everything." She stared at the napkin again. Maybe Mark wasn't just helping her out of pity. Maybe this was something deeper, something owed. But part of her didn't want to believe that. Because if this was just guilt, not kindness, it would break her heart all over again. The next day, Mark didn't show up. Nor the next. 3 days passed. Each time the doorbell rang, Haley's chest tightened with hope, only for disappointment to replace it. By the fourth night, she gave up pretending not to care. She pulled her jacket on, grabbed the napkin and the photo, and stepped into the rain. She didn't know where he lived, but she knew where he used to work. The Reynolds Foundation headquarters sat just a few blocks away, a glass building that looked too clean, too perfect, for the man she'd seen sipping coffee in a corner booth. She walked in, drenched but determined. The receptionist blinked at her. "Ma'am, do you have an appointment?" Haley slammed the photo on the counter. "Tell Mark Reynolds that Haley Turner needs to talk to him. He'll know why." The receptionist froze, then picked up the phone. Moments later, a familiar voice came through the hallway. "Haley?" Mark stood there, surprise and something like fear flickering in his eyes. "I didn't think you'd come here," he said quietly. "I didn't think you'd disappear," she shot back. He nodded, glancing at the photo in her hand. "I needed time to think." "So think faster," she said. "Because I deserve to know the truth." Mark looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. "You're right. You deserve to know everything." And that was the night everything changed. The crying waitress who thought she'd met a kind stranger was about to learn that their lives had been intertwined long before that first cup of coffee. The morning rush had barely ended when Haley wiped down the counter for the third time, lost in thought. The diner smelled of brewed coffee and buttered toast, the kind of comfort that hid 1,000 small heartbreaks. Mark sat in his usual corner booth by the window, sunlight catching the edge of his silver watch. He looked up from his phone and gave her that easy smile again, the one that didn't just say thank you, but I see you. But that morning, Haley didn't smile back right away. Something about him had been stirring questions in her mind, quiet questions that grew louder each day. Mark wasn't like the usual customers who left small tips and smaller eye contact. He came every morning, always ordered the same, scrambled eggs, rye toast, black coffee. But more than that, he noticed things. Her tired hands. The band-aid on her wrist. The way she flinched when someone shouted across the diner. And lately, the way she cried when she thought no one was looking. It was just past noon when Mark asked, "Haley, you got a minute?" She nodded, pretending not to be nervous as she untied her apron. They stepped outside, where the sun sat heavy above the small town's skyline, a blend of brick stores and faded hope. Mark leaned against his car, a sleek black Tesla that looked too elegant for a town like Brooksville. "You ever take a break from this place?" he asked. Haley let out a dry laugh. "Does sleeping count?" He smiled. "Barely." Something in his tone, light but warm, made her guard drop just enough. They talked for a few minutes about simple things, college dreams she never chased, music she loved, the mother she missed. Mark listened like someone who'd been starved for honesty. Then he said, almost too quietly, "You remind me of someone." Haley blinked. "Who?" He hesitated. "Someone I knew, a long time ago." Before she could ask more, a car honked nearby, and he changed the subject. But in that moment, a new kind of curiosity took root in her chest. The following week, Haley noticed more oddities. Mark seemed to know things she'd never told him. Once, when she mentioned her late mother, he looked down at his hands, knuckles tightening slightly, as if the name alone had weight. Another time, when she was short on rent, he slipped an envelope under her tip jar. Inside wasn't just money, there was a small note that read, "Sometimes people who seem invisible are the ones who hold everything together." No signature. Just that. Haley felt torn, grateful yet unsettled. Who exactly was Mark? That Friday, As the rain came down in silver streaks, Haley worked the late shift alone. Mark showed up near closing time. He looked restless, his usual calm replaced with something heavier. He took his coffee to go but lingered by the counter. "Rough night?" she asked. "Something like that," he replied, staring at the rain. "Haley, did your mom ever work at the Greenfield Hotel?" The question hit her like a slap. "Yes," she whispered. "How do you know that?" Mark hesitated, a storm flickering in his eyes. "Because I did too. A long time ago." Haley froze, the hum of the diner suddenly deafening. "Wait, what? When?" He smiled faintly, but it wasn't a happy smile. "About 15 years ago. She helped me once, when I was at my worst." Her pulse quickened. Her mom had worked at that hotel before everything went downhill, before the accident, before their lives cracked open. "You knew my mom?" Mark nodded slowly. "She saved my life," he said. "I was a mess, drinking too much, angry at the world. She talked to me when nobody else cared. I've never forgotten that." Haley's throat tightened. Her mother, the one person who had given love freely even when she had none left to give. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Mark looked away, voice low. "Because I didn't want you to think I was here out of guilt." "Then why are you here?" He took a deep breath. "Because I made her a promise." The air between them thickened. Outside, thunder rolled. "What promise?" Mark's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. "That if I ever saw you again, I'd make sure you got the life she wanted for you." Haley stared at him, part of her wanting to believe, another part screaming to run. "This doesn't make sense. My mom, she died years ago. You just happened to show up in this diner?" He nodded. "No, Haley. I came looking for you." The words dropped like glass shattering across the floor. She stepped back, heart pounding. "You found me?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I owed her. And because I saw what this place was doing to you." Her hands trembled. "You think you can just show up, drop all this on me, and fix everything?" Mark's expression softened. "No. But maybe I can start." He pulled something from his jacket, an old photo. In it, Haley's mother stood beside a younger Mark, both smiling faintly in front of the Greenfield Hotel. "I didn't even know this existed," she whispered. "She kept it," Mark said quietly. "She said it reminded her that people could still change." For a long moment, Haley said nothing. The storm outside mirrored the one building inside her, anger, confusion, fragile hope. Finally, she asked, "What do you want from me, Mark?" He shook his head. "Nothing. Just a chance to keep my word." As he left, Haley stood frozen in the doorway, rain misting her cheeks. Inside her chest, something had cracked open, not quite pain, not quite relief. For the first time, she wondered if the stranger who had changed her luck might also change her life. But as his car disappeared down the wet road, she caught a glimpse of something through the fogged window, a small, black folder he'd left behind on the counter. Her name was written on it. In bold letters. And beneath it, the initials GH, the same initials on her mother's old work badge. Haley's breath caught. The lights flickered. And for the first time, she realized this wasn't just kindness. It was connection. But whether that connection was a blessing or a curse, she was about to find out. The diner was silent except for the low hum of the ceiling fan and the soft drumming of rain outside. Haley stood behind the counter, staring at the black folder Mark had left behind. Her name, written in neat block letters, looked strange against the dark cover, almost like it didn't belong there. For a moment, she told herself to ignore it, to put it away and pretend it didn't exist. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when it comes wrapped in secrets. She took a deep breath and slid her finger under the flap. Inside were several documents, a few faded photographs, and an envelope sealed with a gold sticker embossed with the initials GH. Her mother's initials. Her knees went weak. Haley pulled up a chair and sat down slowly. One by one, she lifted the items from the folder. The first was a photo, her mother, smiling in her waitress uniform, standing in front of a large hotel lobby. Beside her was Mark, younger, thinner, but unmistakably him. The second was a folded letter. The paper was yellowed, creased at the edges. The handwriting was elegant, written in blue ink that had faded with time. Dear Mark, I don't know where life will take us from here, but I hope you'll keep your promise, not for me, but for her. Haley deserves a chance to live without fear. She's smart, kind, and stronger than she knows. Please, if you ever get the chance, help her find her way. Grace H. Haley's throat closed. Grace H. Her mother. She pressed the letter against her chest, trembling. Mom, she whispered. What did you get yourself into? Inside the folder, there was something else, a legal document. It looked official, with letterheads from a company called Rutherford Enterprises, the same name printed across Mark's business card. It was an employment agreement dated 2008. Her mother's signature was there, and so was Mark's, but the position title made her heart skip, personal assistant, confidential projects division. It didn't sound like a hotel job at all. Haley flipped through the pages, confusion growing heavier with each line. Then she saw it, a clause highlighted in red. In the event of unforeseen circumstances, employees shall be compensated for services rendered beyond standard duty. And beneath it, a handwritten note. For saving my son's life, I owe you more than I can ever repay. Her hands froze. Her mother saved his son? Haley's memories flooded back, the nights her mom came home exhausted, the way she'd clutch Haley tight before bed and whisper, no matter what happens, baby, be kind. Even when the world isn't. She'd never understood the sadness behind those words until now. Her mother hadn't just worked for Mark, she had saved his family. But why had he kept it a secret? Why had he waited until now? The next morning, Haley barely slept. The sun had barely risen when she saw Mark's car parked outside the diner again. He sat inside, engine running, eyes distant. She grabbed the folder, marched out into the crisp air, and tapped on his window. He looked up, startled. Haley. Why didn't you tell me? Her voice was sharper than she expected. Why didn't you tell me my mom worked for you? Mark sighed, killing the engine. It's not that simple. Then make it simple, she said, stepping back as he got out. You owe me that much. He rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't think you were ready to hear it. I'm standing right here, aren't I? He hesitated. Then, quietly, your mother wasn't just an employee. She was a hero. Haley frowned. I saw the letter. She saved your son's life? Mark nodded slowly. Yes. My boy, Tyler. It was a long time ago, he was only 8. I was too busy chasing business deals, ignoring everything that really mattered. One night, there was an electrical fire at the hotel. Tyler was asleep in one of the suites. Grace was the one who ran in before anyone else did. She got him out, just before the ceiling collapsed. Haley's breath caught. Oh my God. Mark's voice trembled. She almost didn't make it out. After that, I promised her I'd repay her somehow. But she refused any money. She said the only thing I could ever do for her was to look out for you if you ever needed help. Haley's eyes burned. And you waited years to do that? I didn't know where you were, Mark said. After she passed, I tried to track you down, but you moved around a lot. When I finally saw your name on that diner roster online, I came here. Haley's voice cracked. And you didn't think I'd be freaked out by some stranger watching me for weeks? I wasn't watching, he said softly. I was trying to understand how to approach you without scaring you. She wanted to stay angry, but something in his tone, the raw guilt, the way his voice cracked on the word understand, melted her defenses just a little. They stood there in silence for a long moment. The sound of traffic faded behind the steady thrum of rain. Haley finally spoke. You could have just told me the truth, Mark. I was afraid you'd hate me, he said. Because I didn't save her when I could have. Her chest tightened. What do you mean? Mark looked away. His jaw clenched. The night of the fire, I wasn't even in the building. But I should have been. I left early that evening to take a client call. If I'd stayed, he swallowed hard. Maybe I could have helped her sooner. Maybe she wouldn't have. He stopped himself, eyes glistening. Haley felt tears welling in her own. Mark, she whispered, you can't carry that forever. He laughed bitterly. Try telling that to a man who wakes up every night hearing a woman scream his name from a burning building. The pain in his voice hit her like a physical blow. Haley took a small step closer. You kept your promise, she said quietly. That has to count for something. Mark looked up, his eyes meeting hers, and for the first time, she saw not a wealthy stranger, but a man haunted by a debt he could never repay. Later that evening, after Mark left, Haley sat alone in her apartment with the folder open again. She traced her fingers over her mother's handwriting. A strange warmth spread through her chest, a mix of sadness, gratitude, and something she hadn't felt in years, closure. Then she noticed something new. A small envelope tucked inside the back flap. Her heart pounded as she opened it. Inside was a letter addressed to Haley, dated 2 weeks before her mother's accident. My dearest Haley, if you're reading this, it means life has taken me somewhere you can't follow yet. Don't be angry at Mark. He's not perfect, but he's good. I saw that goodness when everyone else saw a failure. If he ever finds you, let him help, not because you need saving, but because kindness is the only way we survive this world. Love always. Mom. Haley pressed the paper to her lips, tears falling freely now. I miss you, Mom, she whispered. And as she looked up, she noticed something strange on the envelope's seal, faintly embossed letters, RE Confidential, Project Phoenix. Project Phoenix. The same phrase printed faintly on the top corner of the employment contract. Her pulse quickened again. What were you involved in, Mom? She grabbed her phone, searching online for Rutherford Enterprises' Project Phoenix. But every result came up restricted or classified. Something about this wasn't over. The next morning, she returned to the diner, exhausted but determined. Mark was already there, sitting at his usual booth. She slid into the seat across from him, dropped the folder on the table, and said quietly, Mark, what's Project Phoenix? His expression changed instantly. His hands tightened around his coffee cup. Where did you hear that? It's on her documents, Haley said. And on this. She showed him the sealed envelope. Mark's face went pale. Haley, you weren't supposed to see that. Why? She demanded. What was she doing for you, really? He exhaled shakily, his jaw tightening. Project Phoenix wasn't just a business deal. It was a cover for something much bigger. Something your mother was never supposed to get involved in. Her stomach dropped. Bigger? Like what? Mark leaned in, lowering his voice. Like the kind of thing that gets people killed. The diner's soft jazz soundtrack played faintly in the background, but Haley barely heard it. Her world had narrowed to the man across from her, the man who once seemed like a savior but now looked like a stranger with a secret. Mark, she said carefully, what do you mean by the kind of thing that gets people killed? He ran a trembling hand through his hair. Haley, your mother wasn't supposed to see what she saw. Project Phoenix was a cleanup program. A quiet one. Cleanup? Mark leaned back, looking out the window as if searching for words in the rain. Rutherford Enterprises was involved in government contracts, tech development, environmental studies, some less than legal testing. We were experimenting with biofuel efficiency systems. He paused, then added grimly, turns out, those tests caused an explosion at a remote site near Detroit. 2 workers were killed. One of them had a family who went to the press. Haley's heart thudded. So you covered it up? Mark's eyes met hers. They did. I wanted to come forward. But your mother, he stopped, voice breaking, she found out about the documents before anyone else did. She wasn't supposed to. Haley blinked. She knew? Yes. She confronted me. She said if I stayed silent, I'd be no better than the men who ordered it. That's when she resigned. I thought it was over. He rubbed his temples. But 2 weeks later, the fire happened. Her stomach twisted. You're saying? I'm saying, he interrupted quietly, I don't think it was an accident. Haley's breath caught. The words hung in the air like static. You think someone killed her? Mark nodded slowly. She copied files. Sent them to someone she trusted. I tried to warn her, but she said she wouldn't live scared. I didn't know they'd come after her this fast. Haley pushed back her chair, her pulse racing. Why didn't you tell the police? I did. But without proof, it was ruled accidental. And after that, I made it my mission to find you, to make sure whoever she trusted never used those files against you. Haley stared at him. Her mother's accident, her entire life, suddenly felt like a web of lies. You're telling me my mom died because she tried to do the right thing, Haley said, voice trembling. Mark's expression softened, pain flickering behind his eyes. Your mom believed in truth even when it cost her everything. She saved my son, and then she tried to save me from myself. He reached into his jacket and placed a small flash drive on the table. This, he said, is what she died protecting. Haley stared at it, her reflection shimmering on the metal surface. What's on it? Proof, he said simply. Emails, project data, financial links, everything they buried. Haley's throat went dry. Why are you giving it to me? Because I think it's time someone finished what she started. She looked down at the flash drive, trembling. Every instinct told her this was too much, too dangerous, but another voice whispered something else. Your mom didn't run. Neither should you. That night, Haley sat at her small kitchen table, the flash drive beside her laptop. Rain tapped the window rhythmically, as if urging her forward. With a shaky breath, she plugged it in. Files loaded instantly, hundreds of them. She clicked one marked Incident Summary, Phoenix. The screen filled with photos, burned buildings, damaged equipment, internal memos about containment strategies. Then she saw the date, August 13th, 2008. The same night her mother came home crying and refused to tell her why. Haley covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. Her mom hadn't just been a waitress or an assistant. She'd been a whistleblower, one who paid the price for her courage. Just then, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She answered hesitantly. "Hello?" A voice whispered, "You shouldn't have opened that." Her body went cold. "Who is this?" Silence. Then a click. The line went dead. Haley's hand shook as she unplugged the drive, heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear herself breathe. Someone knew. And they were watching. The next morning, Haley didn't go to work. She barely slept, every creak in her apartment making her flinch. The weight of her mother's secret pressed down like a storm that refused to pass. She packed the flash drive into her jacket pocket and drove to the edge of town, where an old coffee shop sat half-forgotten near the train station. Mark was already there, waiting in the corner booth. She slid into the seat opposite him, eyes red. "Someone called me last night. They knew I opened the files." Mark's face went pale. "What did they say?" "Just that one sentence." He swore under his breath. "Haley, listen to me, whoever's behind this, they've been watching me too. You're in danger now." "I'm not running," she said firmly. "My mom didn't run, and I won't either." Mark sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You're just like her." She smiled faintly through her fear. "I'll take that as a compliment." He leaned closer. "There's one man who can help, an investigative journalist named Chris Danner. He used to work for the Detroit Free Press. He covered the original explosion before the story got buried. If anyone can make this right, it's him." Haley nodded. "Then we find him." They drove for hours toward Detroit, the flash drive sealed in a plastic bag. The sky grew darker, heavy clouds pressing low. In the passenger seat, Haley watched the highway blur past and thought about her mother. About how one act of bravery had rippled across time to this very moment. "Mark," she said softly, "do you ever regret meeting her?" He shook his head. "Never. She saved me twice, once from a fire, and once from myself." Haley smiled sadly. She had that effect on people. When they reached Detroit, the air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked concrete. They found Chris Danner's apartment on the east side, an old brick building with peeling paint. Chris, a tall man in his 50s with tired eyes, opened the door cautiously. "Mark Rutherford," he said. "Didn't think I'd ever see you again." Mark nodded grimly. "We need your help, Chris." Grace's daughter found the files. Chris's eyes widened. "Grace Harlow's girl?" Haley nodded. "Yes. And someone doesn't want me to have them." He ushered them inside quickly. "You did the right thing coming here." Chris examined the flash drive, his fingers trembling slightly. "I've been trying to expose this for years," he muttered. "But without the data, it was my word against a billion-dollar corporation." He looked at Haley. "Your mother was the only person brave enough to hand me proof. But before I could publish it," he sighed heavily. "She died." Haley's heart broke all over again. "She believed in you." Chris nodded. "And now I believe in you." He connected the flash drive to his computer. The screen filled with encrypted files, but within minutes he cracked them open. This is it," he whispered. "Emails between board members, payment trails, falsified safety reports. It's enough to blow the company wide open." Mark exhaled shakily. "Then we release it." Chris shook his head. Not so fast. They'll do everything they can to stop us. You two need to disappear for a few days while I prepare the story. If they know where you are, they'll come for the source." Haley frowned. "You think they'd really?" He cut her off. "They've done worse." That night, Haley and Mark checked into a small roadside motel outside Lansing. The neon sign flickered through the window as thunder rolled across the sky. Haley sat by the window, staring at the rain. "You think Chris can do it?" she asked. Mark nodded slowly. "If anyone can, it's him. Your mom trusted him for a reason." She looked over at him, eyes softening. "Mark, thank you for not giving up on her. Or on me." He smiled faintly. "You don't owe me thanks. I owe your mother everything." Silence settled between them, comfortable this time. Then, just as Haley was about to speak, headlights flashed outside. A black SUV pulled into the parking lot, engine humming low, lights off. Mark froze. "Haley," he whispered, "get down." She ducked beside the bed as two figures stepped out of the vehicle. One of them scanned the parking lot with a flashlight. "They found us," Mark said. Haley's pulse pounded in her ears. "What do we do?" He grabbed the folder and the flash drive. "We run." They slipped out the back door into the rain, hearts racing, footsteps splashing through puddles. Behind them, voices shouted, muffled, angry. Haley's chest burned as they reached the dark woods behind the motel. She turned to Mark, gasping. "How far can we go?" He didn't answer. He was already pulling her toward a narrow path. The sound of footsteps grew louder behind them. Branches whipped her arms. Her lungs screamed. But she didn't stop. Because somewhere deep down, she knew her mother wouldn't have either. Haley couldn't stop replaying the image of her mother in that photo, her face caught mid-turn, as if aware the camera had caught something it shouldn't. That night, she lay awake, staring at the letter again, tracing every curve of her mother's handwriting. Something about the line, "so you'd never feel unseen the way I once did," gnawed at her. The next morning, she made a decision. She'd find out what really happened at Bristol Energy. She began with the local archives, the Houston Public Library's dusty back section where old newspapers rested behind glass. After 2 hours of searching, she found it. "Pipeline explosion at Bristol Energy leaves 2 injured, investigation closed." The date matched the day Mark mentioned. But beneath the short article was a smaller paragraph. An internal whistleblower reportedly warned the company about corrosion in the lines weeks prior. Haley frowned. Her mother had once told her, sometimes honesty costs more than silence. Could it be? She searched for more names in the report and found one, Sandra Miller, marked as maintenance assistant, non-employee contractor. Non-employee. That meant no benefits, no liability coverage, no justice if she was hurt. Her stomach twisted. Later that day, she met Mark at the foundation. "Mark," she began, laying the old newspaper on the desk, "why did the report say my mom was a contractor?" Mark's expression hardened. "Because that's what she was." "No. You said she worked for you." He exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Haley, the explosion was complicated. The company was in trouble. If they admitted internal fault, hundreds would have lost their jobs. So they blamed her?" Mark didn't answer immediately. His silence said everything. Haley's voice cracked. "She covered for you, didn't she?" Mark looked up, pained. "She insisted on it. She said, 'Just fix it, Mark. Don't let this happen again.' She thought she was protecting us all." Haley backed away, tears burning her eyes. "And you let her carry that?" "I tried to make it right," Mark whispered. "I built this foundation in her honor." Haley shook her head. "You built it on guilt." She left before he could respond, the echo of her footsteps matching the pounding in her chest. Mini cliffhanger, that night, she receives an anonymous email titled "Sandra didn't just warn them, she recorded everything." The email contained a single attachment, an audio file named Bristol_tape_042. Haley hesitated before pressing play. "This is Sandra Miller," her mother's voice said, faint but steady. "Reporting corrosion damage in line 7B. I've notified my supervisor twice, but no response. If anyone hears this, please document it." The recording clicked off, then resumed. "If something happens, I want Haley to know I tried." Haley's hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled instantly. It was proof her mother had tried to prevent the disaster, and the company had ignored her. Heart pounding, Haley drove to the address and the email's signature, Warehouse District, Unit 5, Evidence Storage. Inside, old boxes lined the walls. She found a stack labeled Bristol Internal Records. Inside one folder was a memo stamped confidential. Report suppression ordered by M. Stanford, maintain public narrative of equipment malfunction. Her blood ran cold. M. Stanford. That was Mark. She staggered back. He wasn't just involved. He'd silenced the truth. As she stood frozen, a sound came from behind, footsteps. "Haley," a deep voice said. She spun around. Mark stood in the doorway, eyes heavy, holding another file. "I figured you'd find this place," he said softly. She glared at him, shaking. "You lied to me. You let my mother take the blame." "I tried to protect her," he said, stepping forward. "The company would have destroyed her life. She begged me to keep her name out of it." Haley's voice trembled. "And you lived with that lie while I grew up thinking she failed?" Mark's face fell. "I lost everything too, Haley. My wife left. The guilt, it killed my career. The foundation was the only way I could live with myself." The silence was suffocating. Then Mark handed her the file he was holding. "Read it." Inside was a notarized document, transfer of compensation to Haley Miller. "I set this up years ago," he said. "But your mother refused the money. She said it wasn't about that. Now, it's yours, but not for forgiveness. For truth." Haley clutched the folder, unsure whether to cry or scream. "Get out," she whispered. Mark hesitated, his eyes hollow. "You sound just like her." He walked away. As the warehouse door creaked shut, Haley sank to her knees, sobbing. But then, her phone buzzed. A second email appeared. "If you think that's the whole truth, ask him about line 7C. There was another pipeline, another cover-up. Haley didn't sleep that night. Her mother's voice haunted her. "If something happens, I want Haley to know I tried." The next morning, she drove back to the old Bristol site, now abandoned, weeds breaking through cracked concrete. The wind whistled through rusted pipes. She walked to where the sign line 7C, restricted, hung crookedly. Pushing through the gate, she found a small metal box buried under gravel, with a faded tag that read inspection logs. Inside were papers, water damaged, but legible enough. Maintenance warnings ignored, corrosion visible, leak probable within 48 hours. And at the bottom, a signature, Mark Stanford. Haley's throat tightened. He knew. Suddenly, a car pulled up behind her, Mark again, his expression desperate. "Haley, stop," he called out. She turned, clutching the papers. You knew there was another leak. Why didn't you say anything? I tried, he shouted. They fired me before I could report it. Sandra begged me not to fight them. She said it would only get worse. Then why build a foundation named after her? Because I couldn't fix the past, Mark said, his voice breaking. But I could help others who were like her, hard-working people crushed by systems that never listened. Haley's tears blurred everything. You had a choice, Mark. She didn't. He lowered his head. You're right. There was a long silence, the kind that carries every ounce of regret in the world. Then Mark said quietly, I've already submitted everything to the federal inquiry. Bristol's reopening the case. The world will know the truth about her and about me. Haley stared at him, disbelief warring with relief. Why now? She asked. He looked at her, his eyes soft. Because meeting you reminded me what courage looks like. Haley exhaled shakily. As the sun set over the abandoned yard, she placed her mother's letter back in her bag and whispered, I forgive you, but you'll have to forgive yourself. Mark nodded silently. Weeks later, Haley receives a court notice. Bristol's executives are under investigation, but someone has gone missing. Mark Stanford. It had been 3 weeks since the reopening of the Bristol case, and 3 weeks since anyone had seen Mark Stanford. Haley sat at her kitchen table, the morning sunlight spilling over unopened letters. The news anchor's voice played faintly from the TV. Former Bristol Energy executive, Mark Stanford, has failed to appear in court. Authorities have launched a search after his vehicle was found near Buffalo Bayou. Her stomach dropped. She'd spoken to him just days before he vanished. He had sounded hopeful, almost lighter, as if confessing had freed him. But now, silence. Her phone buzzed, a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. Haley Miller, a voice asked. Detective Ramirez, Houston PD. We found something in Mr. Stanford's office. You may want to see it. Her throat went dry. At the station, the detective handed her a small flash drive. It was in an envelope marked with your name. We're still reviewing the files. Haley's pulse quickened as she plugged it into the computer. A single video file appeared, for Haley.mp4. Mark appeared on screen, seated at his desk, looking tired but resolute. If you're watching this, Haley, it means I've done what I had to do. You deserve the truth, all of it. I didn't just hide your mother's name. I took the fall for people far above me. The explosion wasn't an accident. Bristol buried evidence of defective pipelines to save millions. And when Sandra threatened to go public, they silenced her. Haley's heart froze. She didn't die from an accident, Haley. She was murdered. Her breath caught. No. Mark looked directly into the camera. I tried to expose them again, but they're watching. If something happens to me, go to the Foundation storage room, the safe behind the portrait. The code is 1987. It's all there. The video cut off abruptly. Haley sat frozen. Tears streaked her face, anger and grief blending into a raw ache. Detective Ramirez leaned forward. Miss Miller, this could blow the case open, but if what he's saying is true, you might be in danger too. Haley looked up, determination hardening her features. Then I'll finish what my mother started. That night, she went to the Bristol Foundation. The building was dark, silent, only the hum of the air vents broke the stillness. She reached the portrait of Sandra Miller on the wall. Behind it, just as Mark had said, was a keypad. Her trembling fingers typed 1-9-8-7. The safe clicked open. Inside were folders labeled Federal Energy Board Internal Corruption Reports. And beneath them, a sealed letter, her name written again. If you're reading this, Haley, then I'm gone. But know this, your mother didn't die in vain. Everything she stood for, it's in your hands now. Don't let the truth die twice. Her tears blurred the words. And then, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. "Hello," she called out. No answer. A shadow flickered past the glass door. Haley grabbed the folder and backed away. The lights went out. She wasn't alone in the building. The lights flickered once, twice, then went completely dark. Haley's breath came fast and shallow. She reached for her phone, but the screen refused to light up, dead battery. "Who's there?" she whispered. A faint male voice replied from the shadows, calm but chilling. "You shouldn't have opened that safe." Haley froze. "Who are you?" "I work for Bristol," the voice said. "We warned Mark to stop digging. He didn't listen." Her pulse raced. "What did you do to him?" Silence. Then a low laugh. "He thought exposing the truth would fix things. Some truths are meant to stay buried." Haley clutched the folder tighter. "Not this one." She darted toward the emergency exit, her shoes echoing on the tile. The man shouted, "Haley, stop!" But she didn't. She burst into the alley behind the building, rain pouring down, thunder cracking overhead. Headlights cut through the dark, a black SUV idling at the curb. She didn't wait to see who it was. She ran. By the time she reached her small apartment, she was shaking. She locked the door and fell against it, gasping for breath. The folder lay soaked but intact. Inside, she found what Mark had promised: internal memos, names, dates, payments, all proving Bristol executives paid off inspectors to hide structural flaws. And attached was a final page, a contact. Attorney Sarah Collins, Whistleblower Protection Program. Haley dialed the number. A calm female voice answered. "Ms. Miller? We've been expecting your call." Haley blinked. "You have?" "Yes. Mr. Stanford reached out weeks ago. He said you might be the one to finish this." Her throat tightened. "Is he alive?" The attorney hesitated. "We don't know. But his evidence is enough to reopen the federal case, and it names the men responsible for your mother's death." Haley sat in silence, tears streaming freely. "Then we finish it." 2 weeks later, the news broke. Federal inquiry into Bristol Energy exposes systemic cover-up. Whistleblower Sandra Miller posthumously honored for her bravery. The world finally knew her mother's name, not as a victim, but as a hero. Haley stood at the press conference steps, the sun shining on her face, clutching her mother's letter in one hand. A voice behind her said softly, "She'd be proud." She turned, and froze. Mark Stanford stood there, alive, a faint scar on his temple, his eyes weary but warm. "Mark," she whispered, tears flooding again. "They tried to silence me," he said, smiling faintly. "But truth's harder to kill than people think." Haley laughed through her tears. "You came back." He nodded. "We both did." As the cameras flashed, she looked at the crowd and said into the microphone, "Kindness doesn't always come easy. Sometimes it costs you everything. But in the end, it's the only thing that ever truly changes the world." Later that night, Haley finds one last envelope, her mother's final message, hidden beneath the foundation's floorboards. The courthouse steps had emptied hours ago, but Haley couldn't bring herself to leave. She stood under the city lights, watching the reflection of the Bristol Foundation banner swaying in the evening breeze. It no longer bore the company's logo, it now read, "The Sandra Miller Foundation for Truth and Kindness." Mark had insisted on renaming it. Haley had insisted on running it. As reporters cleared out, she finally exhaled, for the first time, not out of exhaustion, but peace. "Your mother would have been proud," Mark said quietly beside her. Haley smiled faintly. "She'd have told me to stop crying and get back to work." He laughed, the sound warm and human again. "That does sound like her." They stood in silence, the hum of traffic filling the air between them. But inside, Haley felt something unfinished, a small whisper in her heart she couldn't quiet. That night, she returned to the Foundation building one last time. The place felt different now, lighter, freer, almost alive again. She walked through the dimly lit hallway toward her mother's old portrait. Something glimmered beneath the frame, a loose floorboard, slightly lifted at the edge. She knelt down and pried it open. Inside was a small tin box wrapped in faded fabric. Her breath caught as she lifted it out. Inside lay another envelope, brittle with age. Across it, in her mother's handwriting, "For when you found the truth." Haley sat on the floor and opened it. "My sweet Haley, if you found this, then you've seen the world for what it is, broken, yes, but not beyond repair. I didn't want you to grow up hating anyone, even those who wronged me. The world doesn't heal through hate. It heals through courage, through kindness, and through people brave enough to see light when everything feels dark. Mark once told me he didn't believe good people could survive in business. I told him good people don't just survive, they change everything they touch. If he's still around, remind him of that. Keep your heart soft, Haley. That's your mother's inheritance to you, not money, not power, but compassion. Because someday, someone else will need saving, and you'll be the one to step in. Love always. Mom." Haley pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaming freely. She could almost hear her mother's voice, calm, steady, unafraid. When she looked up, Mark was standing quietly in the doorway. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Haley smiled through her tears. "She forgave you, you know," she whispered. Mark's eyes glistened. "I don't deserve it." "She didn't forgive you because you deserved it," Haley said softly. "She forgave you because she believed people could change." He nodded slowly, emotion tightening his throat. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life proving her right." They sat there for a long time, two people bound not by blood but by the same woman's heart, a heart strong enough to outlive tragedy and turn it into purpose. Weeks later, the foundation reopened officially, this time helping single parents, whistleblowers, and low-income workers fighting corporate injustice. The first scholarship was awarded under Sandra's name. As Haley gave her first public speech, her words trembled but didn't break. "My mother believed that no act of kindness is ever wasted. She believed in people who see pain and choose to help anyway. Today, this foundation isn't about revenge, it's about redemption. Because the truth doesn't just free the past, it builds the future." The audience stood, many wiping tears. After the ceremony, a little girl approached her, no older than 8, holding her mother's hand. She looked up shyly and said, "Miss Haley? My mom said you helped us when no one would." "Thank you." Haley knelt down, smiling. "You never have to thank someone for doing what's right." The girl grinned. "I want to be like you when I grow up." Haley's heart swelled. She placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Then be kind. That's all it takes." As the sun dipped below the Houston skyline, Haley looked up, whispering to the sky, "We did it, Mom." A warm breeze passed through the open doors of the foundation, carrying with it the faint scent of lavender, her mother's favorite. She smiled. The world, for once, felt right again. Rain drizzled softly over downtown Houston, tracing silver lines across the window of the foundation's third-floor office. Haley stood there, a cup of coffee in her hands, staring out at the streets where everything began. 2 years had passed since that night at the diner, the night she cried behind the counter and thought the world had forgotten her. Now, the same city that once overlooked her had turned her story into a symbol of hope. Behind her, the walls of the Sandra Miller Foundation were covered with photos, smiling families, rescued workers, college graduates, and volunteers. Each one a life touched by the kindness that started with one simple act. And in the center of it all hung a framed photo, the diner where it all began. The tiny neon sign still flickered faintly in the picture, Riley's Grill. It wasn't just a memory. It was a reminder. Earlier that morning, Haley had received a letter, handwritten, just like the one her mother left behind. It was from a man named Caleb Turner, a former oil rig worker who had nearly lost everything after speaking out about unsafe conditions. If your foundation hadn't stepped in, he wrote, I'd have lost my job, my home, and my faith in people. I just wanted you to know, your story saved more than just me. It saved my belief that the world still has good people. Haley smiled through tears as she folded the letter. That was what her mother meant. Kindness was never meant to end with one person. It was a ripple, spreading farther than you could ever see. That afternoon, Mark stopped by our office. He looked older now, calmer, a man who'd learned to measure his worth not in money, but in mercy. I just came from the new site in Dallas, he said. The community center's almost ready. Haley's face brightened. Already? That's incredible. He nodded, smiling softly. You did this, Haley. You and your mother. She shook her head. No, Mark. We did. You gave the world the version of yourself she always believed existed. There was a pause, the kind of silence filled not with regret, but quiet understanding. I wish I could thank her, Mark said finally. You just did, Haley replied. They both looked toward the portrait on the wall. Sandra's eyes, kind, strong, unyielding, seemed to smile back at them. Later that night, the foundation held its annual gala. The hall glittered with soft lights, jazz music floated in the air, and stories of triumph echoed through the room. Haley stood backstage, adjusting her dress, clutching the small locket her mother once wore. Inside it was a picture, her mother holding her as a baby, both laughing. When her name was announced, the crowd erupted into applause. But Haley didn't walk out as a celebrity or a miracle worker, she walked out as a daughter carrying her mother's legacy. She approached the microphone and looked out into the sea of faces. 2 years ago, she began softly, I was a waitress no one noticed. I cried in a crowded diner, and the world kept walking. But one person stopped. He didn't know me, but he chose to care. And that choice changed everything. The audience went silent, hanging on every word. Tonight isn't about me, she continued. It's about every person who's ever felt unseen. It's about remembering that one act of kindness, no matter how small, can change the course of someone's life. Her voice trembled slightly. Because kindness isn't weakness. It's the strongest force we have. The crowd rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Among them sat Mark, his eyes misty, his hands clapping slowly but proudly. And in that moment, he wasn't the billionaire who saved a girl's life, he was the man her mother always believed he could be. After the gala, as the lights dimmed and the guests left, Haley slipped outside to the balcony. The night sky stretched endlessly, the stars scattered like promises waiting to be fulfilled. She leaned on the railing, the city lights glowing below, and whispered to herself, "We did it, Mom. We made them see." A quiet voice behind her said, "And you made them believe." It was Mark. He joined her by the railing, the cool breeze brushing against them. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply looked out at the city, the same city that once broke them both. Haley smiled faintly. "Funny how the worst day of my life became the best thing that ever happened to me." Mark nodded. "That's what kindness does. It turns pain into purpose." Months later, the foundation opened a new initiative, the Ripple Project. Its goal was simple: fund random acts of kindness across America. From paying rent for struggling families to rebuilding homes after storms, the stories poured in. One viral video showed a single mother receiving a surprise college scholarship from the foundation. Another featured an elderly veteran getting his medical bills paid. Every story began the same way, with a stranger stepping in when no one else would. And every time Haley saw one of those videos online, she smiled. Because each one carried a piece of her story, her mother's story.